Everybody roll tide.
No War Eagle?
No, not me. Straight Alabama, baby. Roll tide. Roll tide, roll.
Harvest Select located in Uniontown, Alabama. We grow farm-raised catfish and American-grown farm-raised catfish. We employ over 352 people, and we're located well in the central part of West Alabama, and our stockholders and our corporate farms are primarily located within about 50 miles of this processing plant. The catfish industry is located in Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas. It's a 330 million pound industry, right at 85,000 acres in this part of the world. We grow the ingredients here in this part of the Midwest and the Southeast, and we feed the fish and we process the fish, and we end up serving it back to the consumer in this part of the world as well.
Harvest Select, once again, they employ about 350 people company-wide, and many small communities in our area, they cannot boast that they have a industry that employs 350 people. And the midst of the economy has been in a recession, but Harvest Select has been able to maintain all of their employees, and that is an added plus to have them in our communities. And that shows their compassion and their willingness to help the community in which they serve.
Well, without aquaculture, we wouldn't be here today farming. We would have had to sell out and go to town, try to find a job. The row cropping got so bad, we got into aquaculture and started raising catfish, and we've been able to grow the farm, and well, I think it's the way of the future. You know, it's the only way to know what kind of fish you're getting and what environment it was raised in. You know, here we control the water and everything's clean, and we know what goes in and comes out. And yeah, I think it's important to us and to the world. Today we employ 5 folks and their family and children, you know, make it because of this, along with my family and 2 children I've raised. And, you know, it's something I'm proud of.
But when you consider the corn and wheat and soybean are grown in the Southeast and Midwest, and it's fed here, the fish are grown and processed here, it's an amazing story to be talking about what we do here in the United States with American-raised catfish, just here in this country, just in the Southeast and the Southwest. One thing that's unique where we're located here in Uniontown is the boys probably started harvesting this particular farm this morning at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. The plant started processing at 8 o'clock, and by noon we can have lunch down the road and then have a good fresh catfish lunch for everybody in the community.
This is Cyprus Island Sea Farms, one of our 5 farms in Puget Sound. This farm's been here in Puget Sound for about 30 years. It's in a nice deep area with lots of tidal exchange, so we get good dispersions. We have 30 pens in 3 sets of cages. All the fish are the same age, and they all went in over a few months. So we house here, this site will produce a little over 10 million pounds this year. This crop will be entirely harvested out within about 4 months from now, and we'll fallow the site, so we'll leave it empty for a couple of months to allow the benthic layer, the bottom of the seabed, to recover somewhat from the impact of the feed and the feces. And we'll test to make sure that it's still in good shape. We test for organic carbon levels, we test for copper and zinc and other things that you look for. And what we're expected to do is maintain the bottom layer so that it's like the areas that are further away from the farm. So we're very, very careful about that. Partly because we're required to be careful about that, but also because our fish really rely on a good environment in this location, and so we don't want to do things that are going to compromise the long-term health of the farm. So this is the harvester. It's the harvest vessel we use to transport the fish from the farm here to the processing plant in Seattle. The fish are pumped onto the boat and then killed and bled, and then go into the hold of the boat where they're turned over in refrigerated seawater until they're chilled down to just above freezing, so that they stay as fresh as possible until they arrive at the plant. And we have a pretty quick harvest turnaround. So these fish today will be processed in the plant tomorrow morning and then on a truck tomorrow evening. So one of the advantages of being a Washington State farmer is that we have one of the shortest harvest cycles of any of the people delivering farm salmon to this market. So it's very, very fast. So this pen right now has about 30,000 fish in it, and it's sitting at about 18 kilos per cubic meter on a density. And what that means in plainer terms is about 1.8% of the volume of this pen is fish, and the other 98% is water. So they've got lots of room to move, lots of room to express kind of natural fish behaviors like the jumping you're seeing behind me. So we try to make sure that throughout their 18 to 20 months in the sea that the fish are happy, that they're it's good welfare for them, that they're well treated, and that they're growing healthy. Because fish are very sensitive. If you put them under stress, they're going to get diseases. So we try to keep them in situations that have as little stress as possible. The fish come into this pen on day one, and we don't handle them for 22 months until they're gone. We harvest them, but we try to touch them to interfere with them as little as possible in that time. The U.S. consumes over 450 million pounds of farm salmon a year. And, incredibly, only 10% of that is produced here in the U.S. Between the two companies, either here in Washington State or in Maine, at the Atlantic Salmon of Maine. If we had access to 1% of marine waters in Washington State and the state of Maine, we could produce all of the farm salmon that the U.S. consumes here domestically and keep those jobs and economic benefits in the United States of America. And there's really no biological reason we can't do that. It's purely a political barrier to us investing in the industry and growing it to the extent we want to have it here. There hasn't been a new salmon farming license issued in Washington State for over 20 years. The process for applying for a permit is extremely challenging, very expensive, slow, and there's no certainty in the system. There's lots of potential to have things go off the rails pretty quickly. So that, it's what we need is a coherent permitting system that will allow us to invest in the science required to vet a new site and go through all the legal applications that need to be put in place to get a site happening. And right now that's been too much of a challenge for farming in Washington State.
The Maine Aquaculture Association was founded in 1974 by a group of growers, both shellfish and finfish growers. They realized that there were certain things that they had to do collectively as opposed to as individual growers, and so that was the genesis of the association. We have 180 farms in the state. They farm both in freshwater and saltwater, and we farm both finfish, shellfish, and aquatic plants. One of the things that is kind of unique about Maine is the diversity of both the species we grow and the size of the operations we have. We have everything from a mom and pop operation with one person maybe up to a farm that employs 200 or 300 people. We have everything from a seaweed farm to an oyster farm to a mussel farm to a salmon farm. That's quite unique for this country to have that level of diversity both in scale and in species you're growing.
Muscongus Bay Aquaculture is now paired with a sister company, Dodge Cove Marine Farm, which Muscongus Bay bought in 2007, actually technically January 2008. And our hatchery, Muscongus Bay Aquaculture, sells teeny oyster, scallop, and quahog seed to our seed customers from Canada to Florida. Additionally, we retain a portion of our own seed to grow ourselves out on our farms on the Damariscotta River. We produce millions and millions of seed per year, which is then seeded into the Damariscotta River. Our market product comes up about 2.5 years later, and that market product is in the many, many millions that is distributed across the country from East Coast to West Coast, north to south. I believe aquaculture is becoming increasingly important in Maine because of the sheer growth in successful farms and farmers who have the ability to hire and maintain staff. It's a fairly new industry in Maine. And I think aquaculture will also become increasingly important, not only in Maine, but obviously globally, because by and large, oyster farmers, oyster aquaculturists, cultivate oysters that they have placed in the water themselves. So we're not taking from the wild, we're not depleting the wild harvest. We're only taking out what we have put in and spent 3 years of labor and devotion caring for. So it's a green industry. We work on being well received by our neighbors and fellow riparian landowners. And if we respect the land and continue to show that we do, I think we can't help but continue to grow.
So one of the challenges in aquaculture is that a lot of what we're doing is new, and we're learning as we're going. We are a business which is based on research and development, and we have tremendous research and development assets in this country. In fact, research going on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in places like here, Seacar in Hawaii, the Viella project, places down at Mote Marine in the Gulf of Mexico. Those kind of research are all important for us to be able to build the sector. The irony, of course, is that much of that research is now being commercialized in other countries because it takes so long to get a business up and running in the U.S.
We're here at the Center for Cooperative Aquaculture Research in Franklin, Maine, and we're a research and development aquaculture facility, and we also do business incubation, so we help new companies start up their aquaculture businesses here. We're probably the only marine hatchery in the United States, possibly the world, that is able to rear sandworms, sea urchins, California yellowtail, halibut, cod, and several other species, all within the same facility. We have brood stocks for all of those species and really good staff that's able to raise those for businesses and grow out here in Maine. Our main goal here is to develop and diversify the aquaculture sector in the state of Maine, and more importantly for the country as a whole. We really believe it's really important that we start farming our seafood instead of harvesting it from the wild. You think about it, every other protein that we grow is farm raised except for seafood, and we really feel that needs to change. It has to change if we're going to be able to keep up with the ever-growing consumption of seafood. worldwide and here in this country, and we want to grow it here at home, and also as a sustainable alternative to fisheries that are in many cases overfished.
Maine, unlike many states in the country, still has a working waterfront. We have in every small town along the coastline, we have commercial fishing. But we also have aquaculture. And one of the things that has happened in Maine is there hasn't been this divide between the traditional commercial fishing community and aquaculture. We are both part of the working waterfront. And so, in fact, the next generation of the commercial fishing community, many of them are becoming aquaculturists because the traditional fisheries have either been overfished or they're closed. You can't get a permit, you can't get into the fishery. And so aquaculture has provided a way for those traditional commercial fishing families to continue to make a living on the water, even though they don't have access to the fisheries.
Well, I'm Gary Moretti, and this is my boss, my son, Matthew. Matthew Moretti. We own Bangs Island Mussels here in Portland, Maine. It's a core company, Wild Ocean Aquaculture. And we mainly grow mussels on rafts. When I was commercial lobstering, an opportunity came up to learn about mussel aquaculture through a federal grant that was administered here in Maine. And most of the people who went through that training process are actually mussel farmers now here in Maine. We happen to be one of those now.
Our typical harvest day starts out on the water, where we pull up as many lines as we need for the day's orders. We bring them back to shore and clean them, debist them, do a thorough inspection, grade them by size, and then bag them up, pack them on ice, and ship them out the door. I'm very pro aquaculture. I think aquaculture is a great way of producing food. It's going to become more and more important as time goes on, because it's a way of producing high quality food in a low impact way. Mussel farming and shellfish farming, for example, are probably the most sustainable and low impact way of farming, producing food that I can think of. We don't add anything to the system that's not already there. We don't use any chemicals of any kind. The mussels themselves help the environment they're in by filter feeding. It's just, you can't lose with that.
I think to grow aquaculture in the United States, it's going to take an educational effort. It's not on the radar screen, so to say, of anybody. Even the Farm Bureau, it's new. It's a new kind of agriculture for them, aquaculture. So I think it begins with education, and then once people understand it, then they start to appreciate what the end product is. And the end product is very good, not just sort of good, not just, it's a very good, very healthy end product. But you can certainly make a living at it, and it's an economically viable way of life, really. It puts people back on the water. I mean, the oceans used to be a huge part of our culture on all the coasts. Now it's just a playground. It's not a work environment. But this starts to move that back there. I think a lot of people would like to make their living, on the water again.
So imagine for a moment a business that you wanted to start where you had to wait for 3 years for an opinion from somebody as to whether or not you could in fact do business, and then you had to wait another 3 years before you saw any cash because it took 3 years to get your business up and running. That's 6 years before you ever see any cash in that business. That's why permitting and the length of permitting is so important. So we work every year to try and help regulators develop the regulations so that they work, but also so that they are not so onerous that we can't do business. And one of the things we've learned in that process is that for us as business people, regulations are a good thing. They're not a bad thing. They actually help protect our businesses. But sometimes regulators, when they write regulations, don't really understand the nature of the business, and so they need some help, and that's what we try to do. Because we have had so much experience with permitting and leasing, because we've been through it so many times, we definitely have the shortest permitting time in the country. So it's important for us to not reinvent the wheel nationally. We could do what we do here in Maine at a national level and make it work.
I'm obviously for the community and for this country. I'm obviously for the aquaculture world in the United States to be strong and successful and not find ourselves importing so much fish as we do. You know, I have people that depend on this company and depend on what we try to do for our families and our employees. So when you look around at the opportunities, the investment and the money that the government's putting in and the private investors are putting in, we should promote aquaculture here, and we should grow our own seafood, make our families aware of it, and cook it and eat it, and the protein that it involves is significant. It's a great opportunity to bring industry back to the United States.
So what is the one thing I would like to see in terms of the long-term health of this business? It's access to more farm sites. We have an extremely complicated permitting environment here in Washington State. We are required to have 11 different permits. If you don't have all 11, you have nothing. So you can have 10 and miss on one and you've got no farm. You know that there are many different agencies. There's federal, state, and local agencies involved. We have to consult with native tribes in the area. And so it's extremely complicated to try and get through the permitting process. If we could simplify that, it would go a long way towards promoting the kind of investment that is out there for salmon farming.
So we have been very clever in this country to do research. We have been very slow to view aquaculture development as an economic development exercise. We need a national aquaculture economic development program like we have a space program. We need a program that targets commercial aquaculture economic development and not a program that focuses on research alone. And that is what we have lacked in this country. The countries that we compete against, Norway, Japan, Ireland, the EU, all have economic development programs that are targeting aquaculture as an economic development tool. We have never done that in this country, and we need it.
One of the most important things to help further the cause of aquaculture in the United States, further aquaculture development in the United States is, as you said, education. Because through education you get a whole host of other opportunities like better ability to get capital for expansion or starting new farms, more public support, whereas right now I feel like a lot of people don't know a lot about aquaculture and therefore think it's potentially a bad thing, which is definitely not the case. Greater public support will lead to more farms and more production, and more people eating delicious aquaculture products.